Yeah. Okay. Good evening. The CPC meeting for Tuesday, February 26th, will come to order. We had two people who had committed to come tonight, the Ridgewood Group, and also the St. Paul's Church. I don't know where they are, and I left a message with them. The rest of them, people could come or not come or whatever, so I think unfortunately we're going to have them all the next time. But we thank you guys for coming tonight on such short order and under these circumstances, so thank you. This isn't the planning board, John, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
We are going to have to communicate to the other folks who they're going to need to come in if they want.
Yeah, I know. I've already talked.
No, I'm just saying we're going to have to give it to them a little bit more pressure, right? I mean.
Oh yeah.
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 Like your dates, like this is the date and the time?
Yeah, like
Well,
I'm
at
with
this
you.
point,
You
they
don't-
know they have to come to they knew there were only two, so if they passed on the first one, they'd have to come to the second one.
I agree with you conceptually.
So,
Right,
good.
that was the whole point. Okay.
Great, well, again, thank you guys for coming on short notice and
Sure.
having all sorts of things. You can take it whatever way you want. Probably since some of the members of the committee are new, it might be useful to have some context of the history of the projects we've done and the overall strategy and philosophy of Ridgewood and what we're trying to do.
Sure, thanks. Just as, by way of introduction, Joseph Pellich is a member of the Board of Trustees of Ridgewood Cemetery, as am myself. And Jim LaFond is on his way in, who's the president of the association. And thanks for having us here this evening. Just as John had requested, just by way of background, Ridgewood Cemetery was formed around 1849. It was established as the third cemetery or burial ground in North Andover. It was originally called the Andover Cemetery when it was created. Then the name changed in 1875. And the cemetery is it's a private, non-sectarian cemetery, a nonprofit run by a nonprofit board of trustees. There are 8 of us with 2 employees, three employees, the superintendent and another laborer, and also the administrative assistant at the cemetery. And so we run on a sort of very short budget. Our revenues are derived from sales at the cemetery, and we have a smaller or modest endowment that we have as well. That's set aside for perpetual care of the cemetery and the gravestones there as well. And so back about, I'd say about 6 or 7, maybe 8 years ago now, we filed our first application with the Community Preservation Committee, which started some initial work on some of the main gates to the cemetery on Salem Street. And I actually told you it was supposed to be 8 o'clock, so that, it's Jim LaFond, president of the association. And so that was our first project, which was involved restoration of the main gates on Salem Street. And then from there, we decided to get into a little more master planning. And so through funding in part by town meeting through the CPC's recommendation, we developed an historic landscape master plan. We also developed a master plan for the conservation of the older monuments within the cemetery as well. And since that time, we've been sort of implementing on a phased basis both master plans, leading to the restoration of certain areas like the Veterans Cemetery, where, as most or all of you know, this is where the Memorial Day celebration is held every year. And so, basically, the CPC's recommendations have been fantastic for this cemetery. It's really transformed it, we believe, into a really well-run cemetery and thoughtful and respectful of the historic nature of it. As most of you are aware as well, through the financial support from the CPC and actually from town meeting, we also developed a National Register nomination form, and 2 years ago the cemetery became a National Register was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, which really sort of accelerated our efforts to undertake additional work at the cemetery in various areas. So that's sort of the background. And in terms of what we're looking at this year, and just as backup as well, there are a couple of projects that are still in process, one of which is the restoration of the Hearst House that was funded about a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago. And ran into some delays, but we expect to be under construction very shortly in terms of reconstruction of that building in accordance with the Secretary of Interior standards. And so that's underway, and we're also undertaking some additional document preservation and conservation efforts as well. And those are older projects that, we hope to complete by year end. So with respect to the proposal this year, it's basically broken into 5 different components, 4 of which are more related to the sort of, I would say, the newer half of the cemetery, basically the portion of the cemetery that's closer to Marlborough Ridge Road as opposed to at the front by Salem Street. So the 5 projects, I'll just summarize them there. I'll just list them as we identify them in their application. There's a farm pond overlook restoration. There's the former maintenance yard area perimeter restoration plan. Then the third item is a conservation of historic landscape and pathways in the Grove section, in the older section of the cemetery. That builds upon what was funded several years ago. As well as Marlborough Ridge Road Historic Landscape Area, where Harlan Kelsey, the landscape architect, had originally designed that section of the cemetery. And lastly, historic grave marker conservation, which is sort of a phased effort where we've been conserving and restoring the gravestones in accordance with the Department of Interior preservation standards. And there is a preservation brief on just historic monuments. It was a preservation brief number 48, which is specifically designed to provide a method by which you restore and conserve markers in monuments in the cemetery. And so just, and the total amount requested in this proposal is $395,000, as you know. And so in terms of the farm pond overlook restoration, this is just the plan of the again, the back half, or the Marlborough Ridge Road side of the cemetery. And so Marlborough Ridge Road is if I can get this to work, Marlborough Ridge Road is down here, Abbott Street is in this location, Johnson Street is in this location. And so in the area marked A is what we're looking at and what we're calling as the farm pond overlook restoration. In our historic landscape master plan, it identified this area as an area that would really benefit from some conservation and restoration. It's been long overgrown. It was actually part of the old Calzetta farm. And when Ridgewood purchased the old Calzetta farm, portion of the Calzetta farm back in the, I think, mid-1980s, this was a part of it, and that's where all the newer burials are occurring in this area. But in this area A is, and behind this area, this is where the pond area is located. Behind that is, it's Minicucci's, Dave Minicucci's house to the, Hope Minicucci's home to the back here, but there's also an access point to Johnson there as well for the cemetery that hasn't been used. But the idea here is there's a lot of invasives in this area. What we're looking to do is to restore that area consistent with the restoration efforts we have undertaken in terms of landscape enhancements in other parts of the cemetery, and open that area up as an additional amenity that ties into the other elements that we've been improving. So that's the first component. If you want to add anything further, guys, just let me know. And so that's the first project. The second proposed project is the former maintenance yard area, which is identified as B, which is principally in this area. In our master plan, and as you may recall, for those who have been out there, there was an old maintenance shed that was a real eyesore, and that has since been demolished. And in addition to that, we've worked with the Conservation Department because there's a need to clean up some of these areas because of historic placement of flowers and dirt and fill that have accumulated over the years. So we needed to create a separation between the wetland resource areas and that maintenance area. And so we've done that, and if you look at the photos in our application, you see it's sort of like barren now. And what we'd like to do is again, install additional landscape plantings in this area. And also, if you go out to this new section of the cemetery, you'll see on the perimeter of the cemetery, in this area and in this area and here, it's very thin in terms of a screening. And so, because when you go out there, all you see are houses. And so there are some areas that are fairly well screened, but what we'd like to do is increase the plantings in those areas to make it a little more secluded and to sort of conserve those areas to make them stand out a little bit more and to keep it separate from the existing houses in that neighborhood area. And so, you know, we have a planting plan to sort of create this screening and planting to bring it around again in that perimeter of this location.
And family plots.
Yeah, and you know, it's one of the items that we're trying to encourage, to the extent that you can encourage these things, is in the older sections of the cemetery, you had family plots. And so what we're trying to do is encourage that sort of pattern, to bring that historic pattern over to this area as well. That's not part of the funding piece for that, but that's something that we'd like to sort of reintroduce to this newer section of the cemetery, because everything basically from the 70s and later has been more linear, like a historic, like many modern cemeteries, and we're trying to get away from that to sort of bring additional character to the cemetery to match the older historic areas of the cemetery as well. So that is the second proposal that we had planned. The third was the Grove section. If the Grove section of the cemetery is actually the older portion of the cemetery. It's identified as Area C. And just to get your bearings, the main gate in Salem Street is right here. So if you come down Central Ave and then you take a right, you're going downhill, it's a downhill slope. You'll come into the Grove area of the cemetery. That's where the hearse house is being currently reconstructed. And 2 years ago, the CPC recommended and town meeting approved an initial restoration program because there were a lot of diseased trees. Was it the woody algidid was destroying the ash trees in the area. So we embarked on that process and we took down a lot of the trees in that area. And if you look at the photos in the application that we submitted, there are still a lot of barren areas that need to be filled, particularly along the perimeter and along this steep slope. You can't see the elevation here, but it's a downslope when you go from this location to here. So we'd like to sort of provide additional plantings, historic plantings to match what was there in the recent past to enhance that area as well. And so that's the third piece. The fourth is along Marble Ridge Road, where sort of near the main gate to Marble Ridge Road, which is where we had undertaken work for the Atkins Gate, it's called, right in this location. And that's where Harlan Kelsey, the landscape architect, had designed in the 30s and the 40s landscape plan for this area. And for those who don't know who Harlan Kelsey is, he was at the time a well-known landscape architect who partnered with Frederick Law Olmsted and designed Skyline Drive in the Shenandoah National Parks. He's a native of Boxford, and he had like a 500-acre nursery in Boxford. But in the 1940s, for whatever reason, he was brought in and designed and re-landscaped this area, put together a plan for re-landscaping of this area, principally with a lot of rhododendron varieties and many of which have died off, but others we've been able to prune and restore. And I think what we want to do in this phase is also to bring back some additional landscape and sort of the general plan of what Kelsey was trying to accomplish in this particular area. And so what we're looking at is some strategic plantings, landscape areas that would be consistent with what was originally planned by Kelsey. And lastly is just simply monument conservation. We've had a couple of rounds of funding for monument conservation through CPC. We had, and that was as a result of a master plan that was funded by CPA funding, which led to sort of a priority checklist for monuments that needed restoration because many of them were in disrepair. And so I think we've done a pretty successful job of restoring a lot of those monuments, but still there's some work that needs to be done. If you have been out to the, if you had a chance to be out to the cemetery recently, you'll see that a lot of the white marble stones have been conserved and really brought back to their natural color, and it's striking when you see those monuments restored in that fashion. And so we want to continue on that effort further on to the south of the main cemetery area to extend that conservation effort in that part of the cemetery, the newer section of the cemetery. So that's basically the list of projects that we have proposed. We think we are, with these efforts, we think we can get a lot of that done, maybe by the fall, if funding was available. If not, it would carry on to the spring to finish that up, because we just want to hit the planting season correctly. So that's about it.
So, John, I think it's important, because there's so many new guys here and they don't know your history, as far as why it's important. This is important to us, being a town that we don't have a town cemetery, and just a lot of what you're doing is you're going to be able to have more. I mean, some of the work that you've done, you've been able to have more places for more people. If you can just,
Yeah.
because I think that's important.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, because the town of North Andover doesn't have its own cemetery, they've acquired several plots within the cemetery to comply with law. And we view this as a partnership with the town and have been over the years. And in terms of, future plans for the cemetery, 20 years ago, well, actually, maybe about 10 years ago, we thought we only had about 20 years left of remaining plots in the cemetery, and thought we would have to shut things down, which would be a bad thing. So as part of the landscape master planning efforts and sort of a little bit separate and apart, we discovered that there are many, many more options for burial in the cemetery, and there's probably at least another 100 years or plus of available space. By taking a look at some of the historic areas, maybe shrinking the paths, you can add additional capacity in those areas as well. So that's been an additional benefit, so that hopefully the cemetery and the town in the future wouldn't have to acquire new property, at least in the immediate future, for a new cemetery. So that's another piece. Thanks, Terry. That's a good, important point to raise. So I think that's basically the range of projects that we'd like to get involved with, and we have a great board of trustees that's been very engaged and very helpful to get a lot of this done. And I think when Memorial Day comes around, you really see the work that's been done. A lot of it is going to take years to really mature, but I think we've put all the pieces in place to make this a lasting garden-style cemetery for many years to come.
We have a project supervisor, essentially the gentleman who runs the cemetery. He's got almost 30 years there, and I can't say enough great things about him. He works literally 7 days a week. His whole life is making this place amazing and beautiful. And I mean, most people can pull in and say, "Hey, Scott, where is my mom or dad or brother?" And he'll say, either follow me, because he knows where they are, to thousands of headstones, or he can just give you quick directions. So I think we're really lucky to have this in our town.
The greatest.
He really is. He's amazing.
greatest.
We're very lucky to have him.
I only have one question. I love all of it. Just one. It goes back into the, within the proposal, on the veteran side. I know that there's been a lot not implemented from plans, and that's what it states in here. It says plans and specifications have been developed, but the paving has taken place to make it more accessible, but a lot of the recommendations for the veterans lots haven't been implemented due to funding. And I was just curious why that you didn't roll that into this, that's all.
Well, I think a lot of, you're trying to strike a balance because you don't want to have the area become too gaudy in terms of, yeah, and on the other hand, too, we want to be, I think we've taken a few efforts with additional paths and plantings and curbings to really dress it up. We've had to take down some pretty large trees.
Yeah, I know, the area has improved immensely. I was just curious what was left and, because it was in here.
I think part of the thinking,
No, it wasn't a criticism, trust me.
I think part of the thinking is we get a tremendous amount of input. People now walk there regularly. I mean, it's just constantly full of, local people from North Andover. And they say, when are you guys gonna make the other side look like
Yeah,
this
the other
old
side,
You know,
yeah.
my family is, I'm newer to town and we would like
Our
that
lots are
area.
on the other side, so.
So, understood. So I think we try to balance and then infill. So I thought.
I just don't want, if there's still stuff left over there, let's keep that in mind going forward, that's all.
Yeah.
Because you put it in. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that it wasn't, there were still things for the veterans side that you had.
Yeah,
you know.
frankly, I think what it boils down to is we as a board haven't decided exactly. I mean, there are a lot of different opinions on what should be done there.
Understand.
And so that hasn't, we've had numerous discussions and numerous agreements and numerous disagreements
Disagreements.
as to what should be there. So until we are 100% certain what we'd like to do further,
Yeah.
we would,
Fair enough. It looks
Yeah.
great.
yeah, thanks.
I was just curious.
I think also it's feedback from the town too.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we had proposed was in that road in the veterans area was putting in granite,
Yes, yeah.
and a lot of people came to us and said, a lot of people who visit the veterans area are older people.
They are.
Veterans who may not have an easy time walking on granite.
Mm-hmm.
So we had just paved it. So we said, well, maybe we ought to sleep on that for a while.
Mm.
So, we do take the feedback that we hear from people, and it's not that it's negative, but it's just that, they love the cobblestone paths, but some people also want roads they can walk on. So,
Yeah, that makes sense. That
It is
makes
a
sense.
balancing act.
Can I ask you a question? Sure.
The place looks terrific. Let me just say that. So I'm newish, so I just want to understand a little bit. The one thing in particular is if you guys could just sort of educate me a little bit on historic landscapes. Could you just sort of just explain that just a little bit, just so I understand it better? I mean, it sounds terrific. I just want to make sure that I have a fully grasped the concept, right?
Yeah, so I guess, there are many ways to sort of attack the landscaping from an historic perspective. And basically, there were plans that were developed very early on in the cemetery's history, some which were followed, some which were not followed.
Okay.
And so what we try to do is, and I guess there are 4 different components of it that, in terms of the historic preservation standards, there's preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction are the 4 criteria.
Yep.
And so there are variations, and so in some areas, like for example, preservation, if you have an existing landscaped area that's still visible and still is intact, then that's considered preservation. If
Right.
you're looking at, I guess, rehabilitation, then that means it's been neglected for a lot of years, and so you just need to add, it's just variations of what,
Yeah.
of preservation. And then there's restoration. You might have an area that formerly was created, it was landscaped, and it's missing a piece of it because it was destroyed. Then that's, considered another element, and then finally is just reconstruction or replicate, which is basically replication. So a lot of this that we're trying to do is in terms of patterns, in terms of variation landscaping, we're trying to carry what was developed as a pattern in the older sections into the newer section. Yeah, right.
And I reading from the application and from your talk, this has been funded in the past,
Oh, yes.
which is fantastic. So I'm not, please don't misunderstand. I'm not, I think it's great. I just want to make sure I fully understand.
Sure.
Did you take a little bit of the inspiration for this from Mount Auburn Cemetery?
Yeah. Yeah, we made a number of visits over there, and particularly very early on in the process to get some ideas, because unlike Ridgewood, I mean, Mount Auburn has like a $75 million endowment. And so they're the cutting edge in terms of what they do. So we've tried to borrow from what we could from them in terms of what's worked for them, and instead of having us work trial and error. And that's been very helpful. And you know, so we try to do that as well, not reinvent the wheel. And if we find something that works, we'll try to replicate it here.
Yeah, the Arboretum as well.
Yeah, and the Arnold Arboretum as well, too. So we want to try to create varieties of trees so that, you know, eventually when this cemetery stops functioning, it could become a really beautiful sort of arboretum. No, sort of arboretum, whatever you want to call the term. So, no, that's basically it. And so you have a bunch of volunteers who, you know, who I guess are interested in the cemetery work, and so kind of odd, but but it's actually it's fun to get involved and to be able to see something come out of you know, some rough clay and be able to shape it. So
I see, like, if I'm just looking at it and thinking through the lens of historic preservation, and parts C, D, and E are like sort of slam dunks. They fall like squarely within the definition. And then, you know, Farm Pond as a later, you know, sort of addition to the cemetery.
Right.
So the historical basis is not the same as, wasn't part of Kelsey's sort of landscape
Right.
thing. And the maintenance yard, like, you know, I just want to probe a little bit there, because with the maintenance yard, was it one time part of was it landscaped a certain way and part of this grand master plan, and then just things happened over time, and so therefore you're bringing it back to what it was envisioned to be
Yeah.
in the first place?
yeah, well, not all sort of the rehabilitation is based on a plan that was put together for that particular area, and that's where the preservation standards allow you to sort of borrow from other designs in other parts of the cemetery to bring those designs over to these areas. So, I mean, I think that the maintenance yard area was just a really neglected area for many, many years. And so we've spent around $70,000 or so just to rehab it and to move some of the components, and then to restore some of the areas over there as well, because there had been some encroachments into the resource areas. So, you know, we want to be good stewards in that regard, and so we've spent funds to take care of that issue and to bring it back and to seed it and stabilize it and so on. But in terms of those two projects, they're just simply sort of carryover to try to create the same character that we have in the very old initial areas of the cemetery over to the newer parts of the cemetery, adding different features, and so, which is part of the, you know, the Secretary of Interior standards, at least as I read them, in terms of landscape conservation and enhancement, so. But it's all within the guise because it is a National Register listed cemetery as well. So no, there weren't any original blueprints in those areas that we're aware of, but we were trying to replicate.
I guess that kind of makes it a little bit unique as a national historic place, in that it's still constantly changing, right? And
Yeah.
it's not just being a static moment in time being preserved.
Right.
It gets to kind of expand and grow as a historic place.
Right.
Part of your 100-year capacity plan, does that include clearing of wooded lots on existing parcels? Is that?
Maybe in the future, I mean, sort of, there's some thinning that still needs to be done as part of this process as well, so that we could allow for new growth. And as the cemetery expands, that might have to be, that will probably have to occur.
Does that change any of the historic nature of anything that?
No, because I think the expansion is more in the newer sections. I mean, what I had mentioned earlier too is that we found new opportunities from doing this master planning in the older section because the paths that were there are very wide. So it provides additional opportunity and capacity in those areas as well. And that's actually what Mount Auburn has been doing as well, but they charge a lot more. They charge $20,000 to $30,000 per lot in some areas, and it's just,
The cemetery does control a good amount of upland that is wooded, correct?
Yeah.
That's a part of, okay.
yeah, right. And so a lot of the trees are very, very mature, and so that's why we've been trying to sort of get involved in this planting program to make sure there's turnover, and so to speak, in terms of not only species, but also a lot of trees have been diseased, so we want to make sure that we still have a constant level of canopy there.
I think one of the things that, we're not a lot different from like Arlington National Cemetery, which is one of our famous historic monuments in the country, and that they're still burying soldiers there too.
Right.
And it's always that, that balancing act. You have a historic place, so as you need more land and you buy more land, which Arlington does, and we did too from the Calzettas, is how do you retain that original look? And in Zone A, that's one of the issues we have. This was an area that probably no one really thought of back in 1850 or 1870. This is where extra fill was put, grass clippings, things like that. And now we've had to expand into that area, and it really didn't look good. So, we at the cemetery, we spent a lot of our money to reclaim that, working with conservation, because we frankly didn't pay a lot of attention to it. So now we see it though as a big vacant area where we can take some of the concepts from across the brook, the old section, and bring them into the new section. It's hard to do that in the large area in the back that's being planted in rows. We are trying to, we bring in alleyways of ornamental trees and things like that, but now we've got a geographic feature where we can maybe bring a big hunk of the old section, the old historic look, into the new side. And when John was talking, and Joe were talking about clearing, you gotta remember, garden cemeteries were just that. They were planted with trees. They were really meant to be arboretums, wildlife sanctuaries, places for people to walk and picnic on a Sunday. As urban areas became more urbanized and green spaces got chewed up, it was a way to two things at once. And with the Marble Ridge Gardens, which is that area D over on Marble Ridge Road, that was an originally designed area by a fairly prominent landscape architect. So in that area, it's just a matter of thinning and going back and replanting species that he had envisioned. He was big into the Appalachian or Blue Ridge Mountain species, all of the stuff. And a matter of fact, in that area, we don't just have hemlocks, but they're Carolina hemlocks. And we have Carolina rhodies, and we've actually been shipping them in. They're hand dug, the rhodies and the laurels in the Appalachian Mountains. I forget the name of the nursery down on South Shore or down in the Dedham area that does it. But we would get 30 or 40 plants each spring that were hand dug, and that's what we're trying to do. So again, we're trying, that whole garden cemetery concept came out of the Harvard School of Landscape Design when they first opened that college. There was the movement to retain or develop green spaces within cities, and garden cemeteries sprang out of that, Mount Auburn being probably the most famous one. But no doubt, Ridgewood Cemetery is a very prominent one too. There's one in Bangor, Maine. There's a few in Rhode Island and Connecticut as well. But so it's that, just the whole concept of a garden cemetery is pretty unique, and we're looking for opportunities to kind of move across the brook and do that over there.
Right, and I guess from a historic standpoint, if you're continuing those same landscape themes and techniques, to someone who may not be any of the wiser walking through, you may be indistinguishable. Ultimately, I assume that's the goal of not being able to tell the old from the new. I think it's great. And it does look fantastic. I mean, the Memorial Day celebration there every year is fantastic.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Good. Thank you, guys, as always.
We learn a lot doing this. So thank you.
Okay. So, as I mentioned, the church was supposed to be here tonight. I don't know why they didn't show up. Do people prefer the 6th or the 7th? Wednesday or Thursday?
I actually have no preference, so I'm fine either one.
I don't think I have a preference either. I don't know, I responded last week, I thought we were picking
Yeah.
both of them,
I
scheduling.
can't do Thursday, I could do Wednesday.
Well, then let's do Wednesday, the 6th. Okay.
At 7?
At 7, yeah.
Now we're gonna go through everybody that night?
We'll have to, we have no choice. Unless you
Wasn't
want
that the whole
to,
point of doing two meetings, so that we would,
well, yeah, I
everybody
know
would
that,
have
but
their
when
fair
people didn't
shot?
show up or couldn't make it.
well then, I mean, they didn't, did you give them dates and times?
Well, I asked them people's preferences, and other people, you know, as I said, one couldn't show up tonight, that said they, well, didn't show up tonight, so.
I think it was
They
a
said they
difference.
were
You
going,
didn't show
so-
up and couldn't show up, right?
Right, and that's my point.
someone-
If someone didn't show up tonight, I'd like to know that. You don't have
Yeah.
to tell me now.
Yeah,
So
okay,
that's why I didn't understand what the schedule was.
so,
All right, so Wednesday?
what's that?
Wednesday, the 6th?
Wednesday, yes, Wednesday the 6th, yes, okay.
Then we have to go through
And you don't think it should be earlier?
57 of them.
We
Let's
have
do it at
more.
6 then, yeah.
Presentations?
Because we're gonna, what, go through 1, 2, 3, 4,
We
5,
could
6,
start
7?
earlier. Yeah, I mean, I would prefer,
7 of them? 8 of them? 6?
Well, there's 7 total, I think, right?
and so we'll have to, there'll be 6 we have to cover. So, I mean, some of them shouldn't take very long, the fire truck shouldn't take very long. Frankly, I don't think the church will take very long, because I don't know how much more we could talk about that.
The fire truck is going to be on the schedule?
Yeah, the fire truck will be on the schedule. Let me just see.
Because
here.
it wasn't on.
Well, I mean, I think it would be great if we could sort of decide now
Yeah.
what's going to
And
be
what time it
there.
should be.
Yeah, and if we could
Give
schedule
them-
it out now, so we can give people times to show up.
Well, I'll
we have
ask them because
expectations.
different people may have different times. If you want to start at 6 o'clock, okay, fine, I'll just work at home that day.
Well, I mean, I would, I kind of agree with what I think Donovan is saying, is that they're given
Well, give people slots,
Affordable Housing
first come,
Trust at
first served.
6.
But, I mean, what I don't want to do is slot somebody in at 6:30 and then find out that they would prefer 7:30.
I'm not usually given you know, I mean, I present before CPCs all the time, and I'm told what day to be there and what time, and I get 10 or 15 minutes. I just want them each to have,
They
that's
will
totally
all-
time.
I want them to have time, you know what I mean?
That-
Well,
that's
I
what
mean,
I'm trying to
has
fit,
there ever
yeah.
been any indication in any of our meetings ever that people haven't had time?
I don't think so. I mean, I certainly wouldn't know what they're thinking, but no, and I mean, I'm not trying to be argumentative or standoffish here. I just,
But, I mean,
just know. Well,
I
John,
mean, if
hold on,
you
can I
want,
just finish what I'm saying?
put in times for all the people, and I'll
John-
tell them that that's the time, if
John, I'm
that's what you
sorry, can I
want to do.
just finish what I
Yeah.
was saying?
Yeah.
So I just think that since we only have one meeting left, I want to be fair to them, to make sure that they have time, and be fair to us, so that we're not here until midnight. I mean, which I know we won't be, but I'm giving an extreme example to help prove my point, is I just, again, I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just trying to be fair to everyone. That's it, it was a suggestion.
So what would you like to do? Tell people what time? I don't know, I mean, Tracy, I think that's what you're saying, is just, we'll just tell people what time.
I
and they
thought,
have to.
yeah, I was just under the impression, same with Donovan, not trying to be argumentative, I was just under the impression this meeting and the next meeting was gonna be ABC, 6, 6:15, 7, or 7, 7:15, 7:30. Then the next meeting would be the next folks, same amount of time, so that we were, you know, not all, and not, that's what I thought we discussed last time. I think that's just the point that Donovan's, was, that's all. And it would, the way the agenda comes out to be totally honest, not that anybody came, but it is a public meeting, and people don't really know who's coming or not. I didn't know who was coming tonight. I thought everybody was coming tonight according to the agenda. So,
Okay, so what I'd like to do is talk to all the people tomorrow.
Okay.
And tell them we're gonna start at this time and fill in a slot of time, and we'll do it in 15-minute increments. I think we'll find that some of them will take a half hour, like this took a half hour, but we could have shortened this if we wanted to.
oh, absolutely we could.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
15
and
minutes
we'll
should
do
be
15 minutes and that'll be enough,
I
so.
think that would be great.
Yeah, okay,
I mean, yeah.
okay, fine, and on Wednesday,
Okay.
6th,
yeah.
Were you voting on Wednesday too, or was it?
No, we're gonna do it the next week.
the 14th.
Yeah, the 14th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do it the
So we're
14th.
starting at 6 on the 6th?
We'll start it at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, just briefly on Usler, because we put it on the agenda, I talked to a number of people about it, and particularly Jennifer. She recommends that we not walk the site until the snow is gone, because it's better to do it when the ground is clear, so you can actually see what the soil types are and everything like that. But she thinks it's important. Glenn will go on the Trails Committee. Members of the Conservation Commission will be glad to go. So that's what, I mean, if anybody wants to do something different, tell me, but that's what I think makes logical sense.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable, if we can go out and take a look at it and see what the opportunities are.
How much money is available still for the parking lot? So, the reason I ask is, just, if we need to add something to it before, I'd like to do that,
I don't think
That's a great
we,
question. That's actually a great.
I don't think we need to. I don't know if anybody has the things for each of
Let's
the
see, I can
projects.
pull it up.
I don't have these.
But I'm pretty sure there's enough money
That's
left.
a great point, Terry, in case.
Right.
I thought walking on the hard ground. Doesn't matter to me, I've been there a million times. And I thought what you brought up in regards to that initial area is probably the best place.
Which one is that, Joe? What's it go by?
Oh,
Should be
Let's see.
Usla.
623 Osgood,
Yeah.
Oh,
25,000.
Yeah, there's
just crushed gravel,
enough
right?
money. Yeah.
Crushed
I
gravel.
thought there was enough money. I thought there was plenty enough. Yeah. So, okay. Anything else?
Oh, no, nothing that was on the agenda.
And then, are we getting more stuff together on the Atwood property, so we can kind of,
Yeah.
At least have a direction
We'll do
going into
that.
next
I'd
year?
like to, yeah, we'll collect all the history on that, but I think we also said that we want to bring Rick in and other people from the,
Do you want Rick on the 6th, or do you want to do it on the day
we
we
could
vote
do it
when
on
there's
the
less people?
14th.
While we're
Or
on
we
that
could-
topic, though, I think we should recognize that last year we voted to lower that amount anyway. We voted last year, and we moved money from the Atwood project into the playgrounds, the middle school, rather.
You did?
Sorry.
I
Yep.
don't remember.
I believe it was $500,000, and we dropped it to 4, and I think that all came
No,
from.
I don't remember that at all.
I do.
Well, if you can go back and find it,
I'll get it all for you, no problem.
yeah.
Yeah, it was actually voted on, and the money was taken out of the project and moved into the middle school project. And I think it all stemmed from it being determined to be a passive recreation area, but I can get it through town hall, no problem.
Okay.
And I can disperse it, or I'll get it to you, John, and you can disperse
Okay,
it. But I'm pretty sure that's what we did last year.
okay. All right. Okay, does somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we need to accept the minutes from last meeting?
I don't think they're on the agenda.
No? Okay. I don't have it up in front of me.
I don't either. It's in the car. No.
Cool, never mind then. I would move that we adjourn.
Second.
So we're probably
Okay.
going to make the minutes for both meetings on the
Yeah, the next one, yeah, yeah. Okay.